Okay, so this is the last, number 9, I think, the last and final video lecture on this topic. And the last thing really to talk about is the concept of addiction. This is really probably more complex than I'm going to offer. But basically the concept, what the idea of what an addiction is it's when the body and the mind or the mind have developed a dependency on a substance or a state of consciousness that they find to be unpleasant with withdrawn. There's a little bit of a philosophical difference. Some folks will argue, and the philosophy that I kind of embrace with this one is I believe lots of things, probably everything that changes the way you feel, are potentially addictive. Things like, including like sex and alcohol and shopping and work. All of those things can be so rewarding that we feel weird if we don't engage them. There's another piece, though, that some argue when you talk about addiction, you need to be thinking about only those substances and activities that cause harm are addictive. So there's a narrower definition that a thing has to cause harm. There's a broader definition that anything that you feel that you are dependent upon is an addiction. So whichever definition is more useful for you. But one of the theories is this idea of an incentive salience theory of addiction. Like this is the theory about how it happens. Basically, you try something and, oh, that felt kind of good, right? Okay, so you do it again. Oh, that felt good again. And eventually there's a phenomenon called associative learning. And associative learning is the idea that I have come to associate certain situations or places or things or sounds or smells or foods with this other thing, with this other experience. So these can be like environmental cues or preparation. And when I am confronted or experience these other cues, maybe you might call them triggers, right? When I experience these other triggers, that cause me to want this. Right. So maybe one that you may be seen in the movies is for a lot of people in the movies, after they have sex, they want a cigarette. Right. So this has become associated with that. Or when they smell certain things, or when they go into a bar, or anyway. So the next step then is what we call incentive salience, and this is the final stage of like what an addiction is. And this is that I have grown so dependent on that emotion, on that pleasure, that I really don't even need it. I really don't even enjoy it anymore. Now I need it. So you'll hear cigarette smokers say, well, the first time I tried it, I kind of liked it and I did it, but now I'd really like to quit. I don't even like it anymore. Like, I don't like the way it makes me smell, but I just can't stop. And I say can't stop because obviously, a person could not pick up a pack of cigarettes, but they withdraw um the displeasure, the suffering, for lack of a better word, is so pervasive and so profound that a person can't or is un can't resist. They can't resist. And the suffering that comes from not having the substance is greater than the continual use of the substance. So this is where liking has decreased and wanting or needing has increased, right? So it's more about wanting and not liking. So I was talking to a friend of mine and they were talking about when they realized that they had a drinking problem, and they liked the feeling of being a little bit drunk, and they found that they needed more, that one bottle of wine, they could drink a whole bottle of wine and still not feel that sensation of being drunk. Actually, I think I should go back. And so they drank 2 bottles of wine and they still didn't feel that feeling of being drunk. And so this is kind of frustrating, right? And then they talk about how then they would go to work, they'd be hungover for like 2 days. They'd drink 2 bottles of wine, not experience feeling drunk, and then they'd be hungover for days. Well, this is not good, right? I mean, if someone starts to drink alcohol because of the social or because they enjoy the sensation and they can't get at that sensation and they continue to drink it, that's problematic, right? So that would fall under the addiction, that sort of model. They had shifted from enjoying the pleasure to now, so like for me, when I associate cleaning my house with drinking a glass of wine, right? And it just feel like I don't like to clean those are just two things that kind of go together, right? Or maybe for somebody it might be watching a football game and beer or whatever. So in order to avoid that craving, a person would need to avoid that situation, which that situation may be their home. Anyway, okay. Some things, I think I've already kind of talked about some of this stuff. Some drugs are more likely to be addictive than others. So not all drugs are equally addictive, right? As I've already talked about, the nature of the drug, this is one of them. How intense it is, how long it lasts. Some people are more likely to develop the way their bodies are. And if there is evidence that suggests that that addiction runs in families. And the thinking is that the brain structures that would lead someone, like if you believe you can inherit your height or your weight, you inheriting brain structures makes sense. So the tendency for addiction, not necessarily addiction to say alcohol or drugs, does appear to have a genetic component. And so which leads me to probably number 4, right? You may have inherited the brain structure to be an alcoholic, but if you've never experienced alcohol because you're in a faith community and they never have alcohol, you're not going to become an alcoholic. Maybe you'll become a food addict, right? Because the brain structures to become dependent on something you may have inherited those brain structures, but you may not have been exposed to the same thing. So like in my family, my husband smoked cigarettes. My mother is a food addict. My grandmother was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. My kids got the brain structures. My son never touches alcohol, and but he really likes fatty foods, and he eats really, really bad, and he eats a lot of really, really bad food. But my daughter happened to she stumbled upon, somebody turned her on to one of those little nicotine cartridges. So now she carries those nicotine cartridges. They inherited the brain structures from their mothers and their fathers. But they both have an addiction. Their just addictions are on something else. And then you have a third component here, which are the psychological factors. There's a really famous guy right now. His name is Gabor Mate, and I believe I put a video link to him. And what he says that all addiction is about trauma, and that instead of asking the question why the addiction, that we should be asking what's the pain. I think this is a really valid question. But I think this is a really valid question, but I don't think it's just about trauma. But that certainly speaks to this idea right here of the psychological factors. When you tried a thing that gave you pleasure, what pain, was it depression? Was it boredom maybe? Were you trying to overcome? We also know that religiosity, people who are more religious, are less likely to use substances, but maybe they find another addiction. So in this case, we're really talking about substances. I hope that makes some sense. And then finally, the last slide. There are some of the things that we also, aside from those other addictive tendencies that may predict drug use, stress, boredom, money. So, you're a young person, you're bored, you got some extra money, and you feel a little bit stressed out. You may look for something to relieve that boredom or that pain, right? Something to make you feel different. And drugs certainly are really you can other things, exercise, meditation, prayer, all of those things change the way our brains and our bodies work. But they're a little bit more work, right? And substances are what I consider to be kind of a shortcut. They're kind of a lazy person's way of alternative consciousness. There's other ways to get there, but this is a shortcut. Yeah. Some questions you might ask yourself. I don't think these are necessarily all good. For one of them is, do you drink by yourself or alone? And I tended to prefer to drink by myself because if I was with people, I might have said something I shouldn't have said, right? Anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. And this is the end of the chapter on consciousness.